Hey guys, good day and thanks for coming back. Hey, I want to bring your attention to Martin Luther King and a speech that he gave. It's called the Mountaintop Speech. He gave the speech on April 3rd, 1968. This was the day before that Martin Luther King was assassinated. So he gave this speech at the Mason Temple Church of God, Church of Christ in Memphis, Tennessee. And this speech, to me, has always it's sort of melted my spirit. I've been drawn to it over the years, and I couldn't quite figure out why until I just started really thinking about it. And I think the Holy Spirit's been showing me something that you guys are going to think that I've really lost it, but I'm going to show scriptures that allude to what I'm going to say about this, and there's some very strange coincidences about Martin Luther King, his life, his death, um, and his name too. So let's go ahead and just watch a few minutes of this speech. I want to start it right here. So he's going to. This was a 44-minute speech where he spoke about the injustices that were occurring during the civil rights movement. This is his last speech, like I said. It was in the evening. And he gets to a point here where he's got about 2 minutes left in the speech where I can feel that there's a change in his tone, and you'll see it, and that the speech he's given, the words, the message that he gives to us, has nothing to do with 1968 civil rights, but it has everything to do with the upcoming harvest of souls. Let me go ahead and I'll show you where that point is.
Press. Somewhere I read that the greatness of America is the right to protest far right. And so just as I say we aren't going to let any dogs or water hoses turn us around, we aren't going to let any injunction turn us around.
Right here, this is where it changes for me, and I feel like this message will be the same message that he will give to us when he awakens from the dust. And we're going to talk about that in a minute.
Well, I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead. But it really doesn't matter with me now because I've been to the mountaintop. I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
Okay, so I want to jump into this. I'll refer to this as a speculative study. Look, this is something that just speaks to me. I kept waking up the last few mornings early, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, and these verses from the Bible just kept speaking to me. So, in his speech, he talks about the fact that he was brought to the mountain. So Moses himself in Deuteronomy 34 says, "Then Moses went up to the plains of Moab, to Mount Nebo, to the top of, I can't say that word, to the mountaintop, and he looked over, and God himself showed Moses the promised land, and then he died." So MLK, Martin Luther King, gave that speech on April 3rd, talked about going to the mountaintop, and then he was dead the next day. I find that pretty weird. So like I said, the last 2 minutes of his speech don't jive with the first 42. His words appear to speak to me to the time right before the Lord returns. I really think, he was killed on the next day on April 4th. And like every time this year, I see this speech and I watch it. I don't know, it's been like about 5 years now. And it seems very prophetic for me. So he concluded there, he says, we as a people will get to the promised land. He said that on April 3rd. So this is what I'm going to say, okay? So the premise of this speculative study is that Martin Luther King Jr. will be resurrected again and be part of the cloud of witnesses that will work the final harvest of souls just before the Lord returns to rapture his church. I see him as an Elijah that will set right the minds of the people of the USA, people of all colors. I see that. I mean, this country is so screwed up. Not just, I'm not pointing fingers at any different ethnic groups, but I feel like everybody would respect him if he was to show back up again. Now, how do I even begin to even say that? So the last verses of the Bible go like this in Malachi. It says, behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the great and awesome day of the Lord, and he will turn the hearts of the fathers to the children and the hearts of the children to the fathers. What Jesus says about this Elijah the prophet is that he will restore all things. Now, I'm not saying that Martin Luther King Jr. is one of the witnesses, but I know there's going to be many witnesses that are going to come. How do we even know this about this resurrection? So let me go ahead and try to prove with Scripture that there is going to be a resurrection of people like this, of the saints of old. Now, I'll talk about that in a minute because there's another verse. We'll look at that. But in Daniel 3, it goes like this. It says, and at that time, Michael shall arise, the great prince who has charge over your people, and there shall be a time of trouble. That's Jacob's trouble. Now, Jacob is the Jews and the Christians. Some people just think it's just the Jews, but it's the Jews and the Christians. And there'll be a time of trouble, and that time of trouble really starts at Revelation 6 seals. And this time will be such as never has been before at this nation at this time. But at that time your people shall be delivered, everyone whose name is found written in the book. And many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, and some to shame and everlasting contempt. So a lot of people look at this verse and they say, well, that's just probably the resurrection of the dead. Or is that the great white throne judgment? It's not. It occurs, this resurrection that Daniel's talking about occurs right when the time of trouble begins. So you might say, well, hold on a minute. What about 1 Corinthians 15? Well, let's read that. It says, behold. Oh, first off, there's these two groups that are rising from the dead. There's the righteous and the unrighteous that are rising. Two groups. When you read 1 Corinthians 15:51, this resurrection of the dead happens at the last trumpet. Now, is that the trumpet of Revelation? Maybe so. I'm not saying that it is, but you can see here that this resurrection that Paul speaks about in 1 Corinthians 15 is only talking about righteous people. It's not talking about both two groups of people resurrecting. These are believers resurrecting. And I would say that this Daniel 3 resurrection is not the same resurrection as this 1 Corinthians 15. So let me continue on. It makes a reference to this, "O death, where is your sting?" that Paul speaks about. We see that same reference in Hosea 13, verse 14. And it says, "O Sheol, where's your sting?" And if you read Hosea, which is unfulfilled prophecy, you see that Hosea 13, verse 14, is speaking about the same resurrection as 1 Corinthians 15, 51, and 52. And this Hosea 13 is deep. If you saw my studies on Hosea, this is deep, deep into the events of the return of the Lord. So this Daniel 3 is a resurrection that I think has caught people really off guard some, because it's got these two groups that are rising from the dead. We see this same thing. I did a video about Second Baruch. We see this same thing from Daniel 2, this resurrection from Daniel. We see the same thing in the second book of Baruch. And in the second book of Baruch, it speaks about the same thing that's talked about in Daniel, where these two groups rise. Now, I'll go ahead and leave a link to both of these studies. So if you look at Second Baruch, which is an apocryphal book, yes, I know I'm not going to say that it's 100% inspired, but it has some interesting information in there. And this is what it says. It says, "For the earth shall surely give back the dead at that time." This is that time of tribulation it speaks about. It says, "For at that time it will be necessary to show the living that the dead have come back to life again, and that the departed have returned." This sounds a lot like this Daniel 12. Okay? And look what it says. So the yellow text here are the unrighteous, and the green text are the righteous. So in Second Baruch, we see two groups of people coming back to life. It says this, it says, and it will happen after this, when the appointed day has gone by, that both the appearance of those who are found to be guilty, as well as the glorious who are righteous, will be changed. So there's going to be an event where both groups that come alive, they will be transformed. And in Baruch's account of this, those who are righteous, they will get a changed, imperishable body, and those who are evil, their body will actually begin to deteriorate even worse, kind of like the zombies. But the point is, Second Baruch speaks just like Daniel 12. So this is showing that at the beginning of these events, that surely there will be an event where people will come back from the grave. And according to the second book of Baruch, these people will be recognized by those who will remain alive. Okay, so let's look at the first time that Jesus was here. And the question is, what happened the first time Jesus came to the earth? Was there a resurrection of the saints of old? And the answer is yes. The moment that Jesus died on the cross, the saints of old were raised. Saints of old were raised. So it goes like this, Matthew 27. It says, "The tombs also were opened when Jesus died," John 14, "and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. And they came, and coming up out of their tombs after his resurrection, 3 days later, they went into the holy city, and they appeared to many." So they went in and witnessed. So there was a cloud of witnesses that were there when Jesus came the first time and was shown to be glorified in the land of Israel. So some of the midpoint conclusion is that we've established that formerly dead people will come back from the grave at the beginning of Jacob's trouble, both righteous and evil, and the people at this time will recognize him. This is what's been speaking to me about this whole thing with Martin Luther King. So the question for me is, the first time that Jesus came, these saints of old were raised at his second coming. Were raised on the 14th day of Nisan. So at his second coming, will the Lord maintain that same pattern and raise these folks on the 14th day of Nisan? I'm not setting a date, but that date's coming up here in a few weeks. All right. So let me jump into some interesting things about Martin Luther King that you might not know, which I find to be pretty interesting. Okay, so he died on Thursday, April 4th, 1968. On Enoch's calendar and on the lunar calendars of 30 AD and 33 AD, that's essentially the same date. So on Enoch's calendar, that's Nisan 15, right? That's the day after Passover. We think that Jesus died on the 14th day, okay? But many scholars actually believe, if you look at the lunar calendar, that Jesus either died on April 3rd or April 7th. It's essentially the same day. April 4th, April 3rd, April 7th. You can see here I snipped a piece out of Wikipedia. Whether it's 30 AD, 33 AD, it looks like Martin Luther King died essentially on the same day as Jesus did, which I find pretty incredible when you think about it. Let's go to something else here. What day do most scholars believe that Jesus was born on? So the consensus is it's the fall of the year. And there's been analyses of Zechariah's priestly service, and really it comes out to be sometime mid-September, early October. So that's the exact same time as the Feast of Tabernacles. So many people think that Jesus came and tabernacled among us during this time. So there's another consensus of that. And so when you look at this, you know that Jesus was also went into the temple on the 8th day that he was circumcised. So many folks think that he may have been circumcised on the 8th day, which is another feast, right? Tishri 22. And that would imply that he was born on Tishri 15, which is the first day of the Feast of Tabernacles. That would mean that Jesus was born on the 15th day after the New Year celebration of Rosh Hashanah. So it's like the 15th day of the first month. Have you ever looked at to see what day Martin Luther King was born on? Martin Luther King was born on the 15th day of the first month. It's kind of strange. So that's pretty weird, guys. So we can see from this that Martin Luther King and Jesus literally appear to have died on the same day of the year, and they were both born on the 15th day of the first month, or after the new year. That's pretty wacky, guys. That's something you just can't walk away from and say that that's not a coincidence. That's a godcidence, is what I call them. There are no coincidences. So let's look at Martin Luther King's name. Okay, so his name is Martin Luther King Jr. So he was named after his father, who was named after the most prominent Christian reformer who's ever lived. So Martin Luther, German Martin Luther from the 1500s, he began the first Christian Reformation from the Church of Rome. So he was the first in line of these reformers. His name was Martin Luther. So Martin Luther King Jr., he's a junior. That his name means he's like the second. He's like the second in line of a Christian reformer, which I find really kind of weird. Martin Luther King Jr. He's the second Martin Luther. And his name also means king. Martin Luther King. And that's what we're told in the book of Revelation, is that faithful followers of Jesus will be made to be kings and priests. And he made us kings and priests. So Martin Luther King's name implies he is the second greatest reformer, and he is a king. And that's his name. That's really weird. So the speculation that I really have, it goes like this. It's like he died on April 4th, okay? The same day Jesus died. He was born on the 15th day of the new year. I see him being part of this risen company of saints, just like the first time Jesus came. The saints of old were raised. And he's going to be raised at the beginning of Jacob's trouble with the first seal. And he's going to come to set the hearts of the people right. So who better than Martin Luther King Jr. to kind of jumpstart the Second Reformation for the United States? He said he's already seen the coming of the Lord. And so could he be like an Elijah? I see it, guys. I'm not saying he's one of the witnesses, two witnesses, but I just see him being part of this group of people that's going to come back. Guys, I'm going to stop it there. You guys can download this document. I would encourage you to pray about this. And let's just see what happens. Because, he died on April 4th. And if we look back at the things that we've been told by by Barb at God's Healer 7, she has this date, April 6th. She calls it the end of a prophecy time frame. I just wonder what's going to happen, guys. With that, I'll let you go. Have a great day, and God bless you.